So tonight we have a very fascinating piece here because we're actually going to be dealing with some tough topics, but the logic is solid. The logic is solid, and we're going to be talking about effective military solutions for lasting peace. So it's there's a lot more detail than we're going to cover in the book, A Strategic Guide for Achieving Lasting Peace in Israel, Make Peace by Alicia Perel. There's much more detail there, and there's a lot of good material, resource to kind of look at the details of this. But we're going to cover the basics, right? So there's three core halachic principles, Jewish law principles that we're going to be talking about, and apply them sequentially, right? So number one is establishing a military deterrent. That's going to be the most solid framework, right? And then demonstrating that any aggression will be countered with a decisive response.
Yeah.
And then the third is maintaining security through deterrence. So it really comes back down to the deterrence. I've mentioned a number of times that the only time there's actually been peace in the Middle East over the last centuries was during the time of King Solomon and Deborah, the judge, Deborah. But both of them ruled.
Judge was a general.
Pardon?
She was a kind of like a general, you might know.
She had a general working with her. She was a shayfet, the judge, but she had a general working with her. I think that was, I forget the name in the moment. But yes, absolutely ruled with an iron fist. And I think that's the point, is that the deterrent has to be absolute. And that provides an era of peace and prosperity for everyone. So we establish these principles as if establishing these principles proves insufficient, proactively neutralizing emerging threats with vigilant response until the threat is subdued. We're going back to this idea that, well, we're going to come to it in a second. We'll talk about the detail, the halachic point of it, right? But complete a comprehensive offensive to entirely dismantle the enemy's capacity for warfare and ensure that it does not return in the future. Non-military solutions such as ceasefire, endless talks, international peacekeeping, land for peace agreements, which seem humane, have practically resulted in increased death on both sides. If military strategies can end the cycle of conflict and establish lasting peace, then that shows that these aggressive tactics are truly the peaceful solutions. But let's talk about who determines the appropriate military response, because the only people that should be having that comment is military. Military actions have political ramifications, so politicians will understandably going to have opinion. But in Israel's conflicts, political leaders have often led towards moderation due to political sensitivities, whereas military experts
versus politics, it's the next level, and
exactly.
You can't push anything through
politics.
Well, what's the word I'm looking for? What through State Department through negotiations, then diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
It's next level. It's when diplomacy doesn't work, that's when you have
diplomacy by other means.
So right, that's the military, diplomacy by other means, right? So military experts, they advocate that decisive action on the grounds that this will actually reduce casualties and strengthen Israel's strategic position. Post-conflict, politicians tend to propose concessions. Military experts argue against them. And again, because we're focusing on maintaining strength and maintaining superiority. So exercising restraint to maintain regional stability and avoid getting into hang on a second.
Are you reading off a teleprompter?
No, yes. Sort of, right. But I lost it. Anyway, Israel, in conflict, Israel's political leaders have often leads towards moderation due to political sensitivities, right? And in the end, that doesn't help, right? Military experts, they advocate for decisive action on the grounds that that will actually reduce casualties and strengthen Israel's strategic position. Again, but the politicians are going to look for concessions, and that's dangerous. So, exercising restraint to maintain regional stability, avoid upsetting the international community, specifically the US, a crucial ally, versus taking decisive military action to eliminate threats, reduce the overall number of casualties. So if you're looking at the political side of things, they're trying to tread carefully, but in the meantime, there's more violence, there's more war, right? Whereas the military wants to just eliminate threats and reduce the overall number of casualties. So we want to ask in our conversation is, what's the Torah perspective? What's the Torah's guidelines? And where does it come from? And it's all going to come down to the concept of pekuach nefesh. Pekuach nefesh means saving lives. And that's the paramount discussion. And under the laws of pekuach nefesh, you only rely on expert opinions when making decisions pertaining to the questions of life and death. Now, of course, we think of pekuach nefesh usually in emergency medical situations. That's where the population gets to hear about this most, right? You know, so having done 8 years with Hatzolah in Chicago, you ask the questions about pekuach nefesh. You know, do we break Shabbos laws, for example, and drive the ambulance on our vehicles to a scene when we don't know yet if there's actually a life or death situation? Maybe it's just going to be a boo-boo, right? But we do go, because until we're there, you know, we always say don't trust the person who's calling in the call, because they're going to say it's one thing and then you get on the scene and it's totally different, right? You know,
So we err on the side of caution.
absolutely, because we're talking about pekuach nefesh, right? So it's not that we're lenient on laws of Shabbos. We're actually very stringent on laws of life and death. Rather, we should break Shabbos and get there and check it out and establish if it is life-threatening or not, than to go on the opinion of someone who's not an expert, right? So matters of war, national security, just like medicine, you have to get an expert. And the experts in these concepts are the military specialists, not the politicians. So I'm going back again to the medical side of things, right? In halacha, in Jewish law, an emergency responder is not allowed to stop and ask a halachic shaila, a Jewish law question from the rabbi about, can I do this on Shabbos? B'shas ma'aseh, in the moment of what's going on, the halacha is you're not allowed to ask a law question. Do whatever you have to save a life. You can learn about Jewish law on Shabbos, what you can and cannot do. You can learn about that later, another time. But in the moment, saving a life takes all priority. Do whatever you think you need to do that. If there are ways to do it with less, I remember, for example, when we switched from writing out handwritten medical reports on every patient that you have to hand over at the hospital with the patient. So the hospital has the background and everything, right? We switched from handwritten reports to digital tablets, right? In one sense, there's more to do to work your way through the, you know, all the pages and pages and pages of everything. But at the same time, in Jewish law, handwriting something is clearly a violation of Shabbos. Digital typing, you're not actually doing anything. And so although we don't do that because it leads people to think other things, when it comes down to actual law, use a tablet because you're not actually violating anything on Shabbos doing so. So again, you can learn that outside of emergency time. In the emergency situation, you do whatever it takes to save a life. And we'll ask questions and try to understand and learn later. So, same way, again, we're going to go back to pakuach nefesh, saving a life. What are the details, right? So you ask military experts before undertaking a military action that could put Jewish lives at stake. But an emergency regarding lives that are at imminent risk, halacha, Jewish law dictates that one should take preemptive, life-saving military action first, ask questions later. So if you can ahead, ask military experts about what's going on, but in the moment, pekuach nefesh, Torah-based principle. In matters of war, decisions should be guided exclusively by active military experts who speak purely from a military perspective, not politicians, not diplomats. Political considerations in Israel's conflicts have led to preventable deaths, and we're going to talk about some of those examples. Military victories have been turned into ultimate defeats. So the implications for military operations and territorial consequences, when we talk about ceding land, it's not just a diplomatic issue. We are talking about a military concern. We are talking about strategic land value and saving lives. It always comes back to saving lives. So let's go back into the Torah, right? In the Talmud, and Gemara Brachos, page 58, side Aleph, side A, right? It says, if someone comes to kill you, rise up to kill them.
Yeah.
Right? So this is clearly a directive to take preemptive action. Kill them first. That's what the Gemara says. Torah advocates preemptive strike as a preventative, not an offensive measure, a preventative measure. When Israel demonstrates its readiness to confront threats, it deters the enemy, thereby preventing full-scale wars. So, yes, diplomatic discomfort, get it, but the bottom line, if we're talking about saving lives, Israel has to show it does not fear its enemies, weaponry, propaganda. Israel should summon the inner strength and confidently neutralize the adversary. Because such an approach will prevent war, because the enemy just won't want to engage with us, right? But this principle demands the maintenance of a strong army with divisions posted at possible flashpoints to deter attacks. I want to use the Rebbe's words here, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, when the Jewish people follow Jewish law and project strength, fear will follow their enemies. As the Torah teaches, quote, and all the nations of the world will see that the name of God is called upon you and they shall fear you. That's associated with the tefillin. So every time we put on tefillin, we're bringing on a spiritual advantage. We're bringing on a spiritual power associated with a verse that says, all the nations of the world will see that God's name is called upon you and they shall fear you. So that fear will not only deter them from attempting to attack the Jewish people, but it will also cause them, again, quote from the Torah, to flee before you on 7 paths, meaning to scatter in distress. In other words, they will flee from the land of Israel and areas vital to Israel's security. And the outcome will actually be a benefit to the terrorists themselves because it will avoid harm because they leave the area. The Rebbe says if we embrace this approach, which is in Jewish law, and we've displayed the resolve and the strength, this is the only real path to ensuring true peace. Judaism fundamentally is a peace-loving religion, and we don't advocate killing. But when a nation sets out on a vendetta against the Jewish people, and they openly proclaim murderous hatred, we have a moral obligation to engage in our own self-defense. Case studies. Let's actually look at the examples, right? The 6-Day War. Egypt and Syria, with support from Russia, had threatened Israel in the months leading up to the war. The chairman of the PLO at the time said of the Jews in Israel, those who survive remain in Palestine, but I imagine there will be no survivors. Quote from them.
Yeah.
Right? So we know what their intention is. There's no question about the intention. On June 2nd, 1967, the Israeli army struck preemptively. They reclaimed the ancestral Jewish land of Judea, Samaria, Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, crippled the air forces of all the regional enemies, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and miraculously ended the war in 6 days with a total routing of the surrounding enemies, which, by the way, had larger armies, larger territories, larger populations. What appears to be a serious existential threat to Israel evaporated in the face of bold preemptive strike. It also gave Israel deterrence against future threats, positioning Israel as a fierce enemy to be reckoned with. So we see this has worked, right? Then, fast forward, before the Yom Kippur War, Israel's defense of the Sinai bordering Egypt relied on the Bar Lev line, a complex system of fortifications, right? Lubavitcher Rebbe sounded an alarm that Israel was using a very vulnerable defense system, strategy on the Egyptian border and had already been proven ineffective in World War II.
Several times.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that, right? Despite Israeli intelligence indicating an imminent Egyptian offensive, Israel chose not to launch a preemptive strike to avoid being seen as the aggressor. When Egypt attacked, the forces overwhelmed the Bar Lev line, 2 hours. 2 hours. And they proceeded to make serious incursions into Sinai. Absolutely a miracle, even greater than the 6-day war, that the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal and the Bar Lev line and then stopped. Like, why? Nothing would have stopped there on their way to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, right? Clearly a blatant miracle. And the greatest proof that this is a miracle is the Maginot Line, which the French built before World War II. The Nazis came through with their tanks and overwhelmed the Maginot Line with the exact same military strategy that Bar Lev Line was using. And they conquered all of France immediately. So,
Well, they went around the Maginot Line. The
Yes,
bar
they
level,
did.
through the bar
yeah.
level.
But again, the bottom line is that is an antique defensive mechanism which has already been proven not to work, and it was gone. The Bar Lev line was gone in 2 hours, right? Don't listen to military. We have to listen to military experts, not to diplomats. Diplomats and politicians, the Rebbe says they're disheartened by the gullus, right? They've lost their confidence because of the gullus. And because you're a small nation in the midst of a gullus surrounded of all the other 70 nations, you lose heart. But again, advice of military experts, they called for an immediate draft. Had the army mobilized the reserves, that might have actually created a deterrent, and there might not even have been a war at all. But again, we go back to the pasuk. If they are coming to kill you, rise up to kill them. Do not wait. Preemptive. After witnessing the tragedies of war, caused a large part by her own hesitation, Golda Meir, the prime minister, in retrospect, said, if God forbid such a situation were to reoccur, we must have the fortitude to discount the international pressure and go to war.
Yeah.
A lesson learned too late. And not even learned yet.
No, hasn't been learned yet.
Hasn't.
If we look
We're
just
doing,
to
we're
2
doing
years
a
ago,
little better.
I don't know, 2 years ago, right? Israel's
not doing
billion-dollar border defense, including a wire fence equipped with lookout towers, were quickly breached by the attackers using explosives, wire cutters, and bulldozers, allowing Hamas to easily overpower the limited Israeli forces present. And what's worse is that the military establishment had advanced warning of the Hamas military training at the border over a year. and
Yeah.
took no action to stop it. In the months and the weeks and the days preceding the attack, there was an all-female lookout at Nahal Oz, a military base, and they were talking about attack is coming. They were reporting to
Yeah.
trouble signs, but no one took
Paid
their
attention.
Ultimately, from their entire unit, only 2 came home.
Mm.
So Israel's military defense had received detailed reports of Hamas's plans. Drafts of the plans had circulated since 2016, and they only became sharper with time, but the establishment did not believe that Hamas could actually pull it off. Preemptive strikes, a more formidable border security, that could have prevented this entire disaster.
Yeah.
So we see when it was applied, preemptive, when it wasn't applied, we see these examples. Again, Operation Defensive Shield, right? The second Intifada was year 2000. 2 years, we saw a dramatic increase in terrorism targeting Israelis. In 2002, the Israeli army launched Operation Defensive Shield. This operation involved the IDF invading the Palestinian strongholds of Bethlehem, Jenin, Ramallah, Shechem, which they call Nablus. During these invasions, the army neutralized many terrorists, confiscated weapons, deterring the population from engaging in violence. Additionally, Israel constructed concrete barriers around Judea and Samaria, which prevented many terrorist infiltration attacks, as we can see from the precipitous drop in terrorist attacks since 2003. But Judea and Samaria, nearly any range of time since the year 2000 would show the terrorist attacks are a constant scourge. But if you consider the tracking the number of terrorist attacks in the first 3 months of 2024, in January, 515 attacks. February, 475 attacks. March, 493 attacks. In 2023, excluding the October 7th massacre, Palestinian terror attacks murdered 44 Israelis and wounded 128. But the Israeli army's strategy against terrorism currently resembles a cat and mouse game. Israel captures some terrorists, but then turns around and releases them with negotiations. It doesn't address the large storehouses of Palestinian weapons and the violent rhetoric, right? So, summarizing, right? The principle of a credible deterrence has proven to be a crucial factor in Israel's security. A few sample cases presented already demonstrate that if one is bold enough to confront threats, take decisive actions, as we saw in the 6-Day War and Operation Defensive Shield, it can prevent terrorist encounters and save lives. So, as we look to the future, it's clear that Israel has to embrace the principle of a credible deterrent to neutralize those who seek to harm it, and do this credible deterrent with unwavering strength and resolve. How do you do that? By maintaining a powerful deterrent force, taking threats seriously, acting preemptively when necessary, and Israel can create an environment where its enemies are afraid to attack, paving the way for a new era of security and prosperity for everyone in the region, saving lives throughout, right? So that's number one, a credible deterrent. Now, second military principle, proactive defense. So, again, let's go back to Jewish law. The Torah says that even if they have not yet come, but merely intend to come, Jewish defenders must preemptively take up arms and neutralize them. This is Jewish law. The Ramah.
Where is that coming from?
Jewish law, code of Jewish law. Law, chapter 329, section 6. Even if they have not yet come, but merely intend to come, Jewish defenders must preemptively take up arms and neutralize them. Proactive defense. Again, we're not talking about an offense. This is defense because you're preventing the war from even coming to you. So, again, we're going back to the Code of Jewish Law. Torah obligates a preemptive defense efforts to be made in the face of adversity. This, again, comes back to the halacha of pekuach nefesh, saving lives. Jewish law goes further to actually detail the evaluation of potential dangers and gives clear guidance as to what risk is substantial enough to not be ignored under any circumstances. So on a religious level, this obligation overrides almost all other commandments, short of 3, including the suspension of Shabbos observance to take proactive measures. We're not like saying the enemy's coming over the threshold, right? We're saying we have data that they intend to come. We have, because of pekuach nefesh, saving lives, Jewish law says, no, you can't ignore this. You have to proactively go out against potential attackers. So what's the halachic origin, right? The Talmud discusses how are Jews supposed to respond to an enemy who comes to attack a city? How are we to assess the risk which must be performed in terms of violating Shabbos? Like, are we going to do this even on Shabbos, right? It all depends on motive. It comes to motive, right? If the enemy comes to steal, it's not necessarily permissible to resort to our defenses, for example, on Shabbos, right? But if, however, they intend to injure or kill, even if they come with unspecified intentions, we can suspect that they might be coming to kill. The town inhabitants must defend themselves proactively, even if doing so includes the violation of laws of Shabbos. That's any town. That's any town, right? Border towns, again, we're going back to halacha that the Talmud talks about, when we can do this, right? Border towns are obligated to take up arms preemptively, violating Shabbos, even if the invader's sole motivation is to steal straw or hay. Why is that true with a border town? Because a border town is of strategic importance.
Yep.
The risk that conflict could escalate, become much more serious, is crucial when it comes to a border town. And in that situation, a proper show of force may deter potentially more dangerous attacks. And for strategic reasons, maintaining control of those locations, border towns, that is paramount, even if it requires a violation of Shabbos. So we're looking at the indirect risk to life, but that cannot be ignored. Let's look at modern day Israel. Current security conditions essentially make every place in Israel a border town. Look at where everything is, right? Between Gaza and Samaria and Judea, every town is a border town. Now that means, according to Jewish law, that we have an obligation to take up arms and preemptively attack, even if they're coming to steal straw, because it could go way past that. Jewish law then mandates arming and training the population for defensive purposes.
How do you know what they're planning to do? You can read their minds. So yeah, you have to assume the worst.
But we don't have to even assume at this point. They have clearly said from the river to the sea. There's nothing ambiguous about this.
They stated their goals. Yes.
Read that charter.
This is nothing ambiguous. This is not maybe they're thinking of stealing straw. We already know their intentions. They stated it clearly.
Keep stating it.
So the Rebbe notes that if the Shabbos prohibitions are suspended in a case of potential for a border town, kol b'chaymer, how much more so is the halachic imperative to engage in preemptive, again, defense, preemptive defense on an ordinary weekday. And this ruling applies to every place in modern day Israel because of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and obviously the other borders. So this is paramount to national security. Israel essentially is a state under siege, surrounded by hostile nations.
Yeah.
Unlike the adversaries described in Torah and Halacha, Jewish law, where they only sought resources like straw and grain, here the enemy has explicitly explained their intent to seize the land and annihilate the entire Jewish population. Consequently, we are obligated by law, by Jewish law, to take up arms, even on Shabbos, and not wait for a directive from a court or a king or a local government. Violate Shabbos, not once the enemy has arrived, in advance, because we already know their hostile intentions. And what's the basis of all this? Again, it comes back down to pekuach nefesh, saving a life. Don't wait until lives are actually at risk. You know what's coming. They've clearly stated their intentions. We have to defend strategically valuable territory, and we have to do so preemptively. And we're not talking about because Eretz HaKodesh is the Holy Land. This has nothing to do with holiness about the land and our rights. It's about security of lives, not only Jewish. It's about the safety of lives. So well-meaning passivity is not an option.
Yeah.
We are obligated by Jewish law to act in the code of Jewish law, set out by our examples of Yaakov Avinu, our forefather Yaakov. When Yaakov was going to meet Esau, right? He prepared himself with prayers, with splitting up his camp, and weapons. He took up arms, not waiting to meet Esau, but on the assumption of, in the past, we see what his intentions are, we have to preemptively, right? Our territorial integrity is critical to security and saving lives. It comes down to pekuach nefesh, saving lives, and again, not just Jewish lives. Case studies. Let's use a couple. There are much more examples in the book. So you definitely want to take a look at the book to see more of this. Yeah. But case studies, right? All the military leaders agree that territorial concessions in Judea, Samaria, Golan literally put lives at stake without any doubt, right? There's no doubt in this at all. Gaza, right? The Gaza withdrawal turned Gaza into a terrorist base from which to launch more attacks on Israel than ever before. Obviously, October 7th clearly demonstrate that, right? I want to say something personal. I was a kid, 1968. We visited Eretz Yisrael. We visited Israel as a family, 1968. Mm-hmm. We went up to the Golan, which we just recently got a hold of. And as a kid, I'm looking at the trenches that were dug throughout the kibbutz for kids to get to and from home and school, etc. Mm-hmm. Because they were under constant threat of sniper fire from the Golan. I still have an emotional attachment to Golan that I have more than any place else in Israel because of the personal experience of being there in 68 and looking at the situation, right? Looking at the kibbutz, looking up at the Golan and knowing sniper fire from right there. 67, Israel reclaimed the Golan Heights from Syria. Although Syria and the international community repeatedly demanded it be given back, I say given away because it was ours to begin with. The Golan Heights played a significant role in Israel's defense strategy for a couple of reasons, right? The Golan Heights is situated on a plateau overlooking northern Israel. Before Israel recaptured the Golan Heights in 67, the area was used as a base for repeated attacks on Israeli communities in the Chol Valley and the area of the Sea of Galilee. Controlling the Golan Heights has eliminated those security risks completely. Additionally, Golan Heights is an early warning system. Because of its elevation, it allows for early detection of incoming attacks from Syria. Artillery, aerial threats. It gives Israel the crucial moments of response time. Terrain. The Golan Heights is a very rugged territory. It's a natural barrier, making any ground assault from Syria, like I tried in the Six-Day War, makes it much more challenging. So again, it's imperative to hold on to. And water. The Golan Heights is the key source for water in the whole region. By controlling this area, we ensure Israeli access to vital water resources and prevent Syria from threatening Israel's primary water supply in the Kinneret. That's Golan. Judea and Samaria. We reclaimed those territories in the Six-Day War. Consider the following, again, military strategy, right? Strategic depth. These areas provide Israel with a strategic depth, which is particularly important given the narrow width of the pre-67 borders in Israel. The Judea and Samaria have high ground. The elevated terrain of Judea and Samaria overlooks key Israeli population centers and infrastructure. So again, control over these areas provides a defensive advantage. It also provides a buffer zone between Israel and the potential threats from the east, notably Jordan. Right now, there's a peace treaty with Jordan. These areas still serve as a buffer because if you think about Jordan's lax border control, there's been a huge influx of weapons through Judea and Samaria. Controlling the Jordan Valley is an important support to be able to control that. And think about the population of Jordan and how anti-Israel they are. Just think about after October 7th, right? And the huge anti-Israel riots that were going on, right? If the regime gets overthrown by the majority, Israel would face the threat with Jordan again. Not to mention the terrorist groups that are already in Judea and Samaria, which are financed by Iran. If Israel was to withdraw, the Iranian military operatives would likely proliferate in the region, just like they did in Syria, and threaten Israel's security. And vital resources. Israel is extremely exposed without the protection of the mountains of Judea and Samaria. Most of Israel, as you know, is extremely low, flat coastal plain by the shore, etc. So that can easily be attacked from the mountains. By controlling Judea and Samaria, using their height to deploy, again, early warning platforms to intercept incoming missiles or air fighters, it's not in Israel's interest to give up the area. They're easy to defend, they're hard to conquer, and in the hands of hostile forces, it would be a good base to launch attacks on Israel's coastal plains, right? Sinai. Israel captured the Sinai on two occasions, right? The first was during the 1956 crisis. And again, due to international pressure, Israel withdrew in 57. Israel captured the Sinai again in 67. That was 56 and given away in 57. Israel recaptured Sinai in 67, Six-Day War. Following the Camp David Accords, Israel again gave away the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. What was the trade-off? A piece of paper. Sinai, power ensures peace. Land offers a strategic power, which makes a country less susceptible to attacks, and thereby it engenders a state of peace. If Egypt ever chose to attack Israel, it now has a much stronger position than it would have had we not given away the Sinai, including airfields, oil fields, and the territory, right? The whole Camp David Accords fiasco,
Yeah.
if you think about it, Egypt successfully gained what it wanted by negotiation without what they couldn't do through war.
Yeah.
They couldn't do it by war, so therefore they did it through a Camp David Accords. But don't we believe in his sincerity about wanting peace? Well, 1975, Sadat changed Egypt's Armed Forces Day to October 6th, commemorating the day that Egypt attacked Israel in 73, starting the Yom Kippur War. Sadat maintained this designation of their Egypt's Armed Forces Day on October 6th throughout the negotiations and the ratifications of the Camp David Accords. How sincere is he? 7 months after signing the treaty, Sadat issued a presidential decree founding the 6th of October city, commemorating the Egyptian attack against Israel. Curious choice to commemorate an attack on a nation you just made peace with, right? So do we doubt his sincerity?
Of course.
We have to.
And peace treaties in the Middle East are really fragile because the totalitarian leaders of that area can change their mind at a moment, rendering any treaty unstable. And additionally, Middle Eastern nations are prone to sudden changes in leadership, especially with radical governments, as in the case of Iran. So what did we gain with the piece of paper? And what did we lose? Oil fields.
Yep.
One of the most significant losses for Israel was the oil fields in the Sinai. Israel had discovered and developed the Alma oil field, as well as others in the region, which supplied a substantial portion of all of our oil needs in Israel. Ceding those fields to Egypt left Israel with an expensive adventure of trying to get oil from other ways that damaged Israel's economy, and they're more vulnerable to international pressure because they're dependent on international oil. So oil is actually an indispensable, vital weapon in modern warfare. Prominent members of the Israeli government publicly admitted, wow, that was a serious mistake. A little bit late, thank you very much. According to government figures, $2.5 billion has been paid by Israel to Egypt for the oil from those wells that we gave away. Oil, that was oil. Military bases and military infrastructure. Israel had invested in Air Force bases and other infrastructure in the Sinai Peninsula, which were either dismantled or abandoned when we left the region. That resulted in a significant investment loss and a security risk. Additionally, an important Air Force base had played a critical role in the Entebbe hostage rescue.
Well, let's just go. This peace treaty was signed in 79, was it?
Camp David Accords?
Yeah. So we've had 45 years of peace. There's a lot to be said for that. A lot of people, no war with the Egyptians since then.
Yes, we lost oil fields. We lost military bases. We lost tourism and real estate that had been developed at great cost. Remember Sharm el-Sheikh? It was a huge tourist destination, right? We lost the investment and all of the profits that were coming from that. In addition, the cost of relocation for all those Israelis that had to be moved from there, had to be relocated, new homes built, communities built, and the loss of the infrastructure. And wait a minute, Israel had promised and supported, encouraged settlements in the region, paid for that, and now stripped it, breaching their promise. So how does that affect the governments to the people, right? Encourage you to take the land, support you to take the land, and now move you out of it. And by the way, who moved them out of it? Young Israeli soldiers who joined the army, risking their lives to protect their people, and are now being forced to drag their fellow citizens, evicting them from their homes.
Happened in Gaza too.
set a horrific precedent on this idea of land for peace, which we already know doesn't work. So the Sinai withdrawal cost Israel strategically, economically, morally. So in an effort to save lives, the Code of Jewish Law guides us in adherence of two principles: the imperative of constant vigilance, military readiness, and preemptive strikes against enemies with hostile intentions, which are clear, and the importance of holding on to land for security purposes, saving lives. And this land for peace doctrine, you can't depend on that. You cannot count on that. That's the kind of idea that would only come up by someone who doesn't live in the area and isn't invested.
Well, but
International community.
proof is in the pudding, though. For 45 years, there's been peace. And
some weird peace,
And-
peace.
And
well,
you
right.
see that,
It's,
you
it's,
see that,
it's
you see
debatable.
that, right?
It's
45 years with one of our enemies, and it can change overnight.
Yeah.
Remember the brotherhood that's involved in Egypt,
yeah.
Muslim Brotherhood.
the Muslim Brotherhood. So don't think
You're right. It could change. The government there could change any given day.
change on a
Yep.
dime. So be grateful the blessing of 45 years, but don't count on that. It is a military threat to give that land.
I must tell you, I've worked with the Egyptian army during Desert Storm. Was not impressed.
Well, again, the absolute miracle that they crossed the Bar-Lev line and then stopped, right? Like,
It was a miracle for them. They stopped. They got through the Bar-Lev line. I mean, they had some good engineers. They had that planned that out. But they're a rotten army. I'm surprised they.
let's go to number 3. Let's go to number 3, right? In Deuteronomy, chapter 20, verse 20. You shall lay siege to the city that is waging war against you until it is subdued. I want to talk about the word siege. We're going to talk about the word subdued, right? In the Mishnah, Shammai interprets until it is subdued as a directive to continue fighting until the enemy surrenders unconditionally. Maimonides, in his Code of Jewish Law, gives this as the final halacha. Jewish law: you shall lay siege to the city that is waging war against you until it is subdued. Now, the word subdued means that the enemy must be brought to the point of submission. Rabbi Rebbe vocally advocated against Israel governments, their tendency towards limited military operations over conclusive victories. Once engaged in a conflict, it's crucial to persist until the enemy is subdued, removing any further threat. This stance is more than just strategic. It is a moral and religious imperative to avoid prolonged conflict and additional loss of life on both sides. We want to say laying siege to a city is a horrible thing. We want to say laying siege to a city until it's completely subdued is such a mean thing. But stop and think the logic through. The practical implication of until it is subdued, right? This is far-reaching implication if you think deeper in this, right? Until it is subdued emphasizes the importance of avoiding limited ground-based operations in urban environments. They can be costly and counterproductive.
Yep.
Instead, until it is subdued, advocates for siege tactics and precision airstrikes. That's in our world today with so many human rights advocates, right? It's hard to say that. Siege tactics, right? But this aims to undermine the local civilian support for the terrorist groups by minimizing collateral damage and disrupting their operations and supply lines. By increasing the pressure on the groups while limiting the risk to friendly forces. I'm going to go back to that for a second. It is a government's responsibility to take care of its people.
Yeah.
Can you ask our warriors to needlessly go into a compromising situation, a very compromising situation, urban combat, in order to save enemy lives? Or even civilian lives of, again, when the enemy is using them as shields? Therefore, our citizens, our warriors should be at greater risk. So we have to increase the pressure on these groups while limiting risk to friendly forces. This seeks to compel their ultimate surrender, leading to a swift resolution of the conflict without the need for large-scale urban combat operations. Until it is subdued, again, it's hard to go through this. It's hard to suggest this idea, but the bigger picture, less lives. In the long run, in the bigger picture. It also, the idea of ending low-level terrorist attacks, right? Persistent terrorist attacks, which has become a thing, right? Since we're no longer fighting nation states, and you talk about terrorist organizations, it's a whole different narrative, right? Persistent terrorist attacks against Israel necessitated decisive response.
That's why they bombed Qatar today.
Yeah.
The alternative to decisive response is to be lenient, avoid prosecuting terrorists. The Torah firmly endorses decisive response, emphasizing the necessity of imposing maximum punishment to deter future attacks. Which again, this goes back to the principle of until it is subdued. A softer approach is just emboldening the terrorists and perpetuates the cycle of violence. Security operations must be comprehensive. Eliminate threats to all Israelis throughout the country. Establish lasting security. Actualizing the biblical promise. You shall lie down to sleep and have no fear. The scripture warns us against adopting an indecisive stance. The Torah tells us those hostile people that you allow to remain shall become stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land in which you live. The Torah is telling us this. It's clear. It's a very clear mandate from the Torah. We have to eliminate the threats. What we've seen happening is the opposite of until it is subdued. We talked about containment, right? In Israel's conflict with Hamas and Hezbollah, this policy has been articulated and even adopted. The Israeli military call it mowing the grass. This perspective prescribes reoccurring, limited responses to terrorist threats. It involves small operations aimed at temporarily weakening the enemy's capacity, but not fully eradicating the enemy. But that fails miserably at providing a long-term solution and eliminating belligerent entities, such as Hamas and Hezbollah. Every time we've done a containment a battle, they only emerge strengthened. We create a ceasefire, they reorganize, they come out stronger. It's just a bad idea.
Yeah.
And by the way, a topic sensitive to all those present, It's the only way to honor the memory of the fallen.
Yep.
Containment squanders resources and lives. It allows the enemy to return and inflict more damage. Fully subduing the enemy would validate the expenditure of resources and honor the memory of those who perished in the battle, as it paves the way to lasting peace. It's not more radical, this idea of until it is subdued. In the recent Israel-Hamas war, we've heard from IDF soldiers quoting, "If we return to the status quo in Gaza after the war, allowing a hostile Palestinian government to take over, I feel like all my friends who died, young men with wives and children, with dreams and aspirations, have all died in vain." We can't keep mowing the grass. It has to be. Case studies. Let's go take a biblical study. Again, we're talking about Torah studies, right? So, case studies. We go back to biblical time in the book of Kings. We learn about the ancient kingdom of Israel and the Aramean king, Ben-Hadad, along with 32 allies. They laid siege to Samaria, the capital of the kingdom of Israel. And Ben-Hadad sent a message to Melech Achav, the Israelite king, with a message: your gold, your silver, your women and children, they're mine. Achav responded by offering to pay taxes to Aram, while Ben-Hadad threatened invasion. Encouraged by God's prophet, the Israelite kingdom heroically defeated Ben-Hadad and his allies, again, miraculously. The prophet then warned King Achav that despite Aram's defeat on the battlefield, they would attack again. And indeed, within the year, Ben-Hadad had regrouped a more formidable army. Again, God granted Achav victory. When Ben-Hadad fled, his advisors told him, the Jews are a merciful people. If you surrender, they may spare your life. So Ben-Hadad's men came to Achav wearing sackcloth, begging for mercy. Achav was overjoyed at the Aramean interest in peace. He accepted the peace treaty, sparing Ben-Hadad's life. Achav quickly overlooked Ben-Hadad's hostilities, even referred to him as brother, and agreed to a trade agreement. Within 3 years of quiet, the episode of misplaced trust ended with another war with Aram's armies, and this time, acting on Ben-Hadad's orders, Achav was killed and the Jewish armies were decimated. Israel must not relent in battle until it has rendered the enemy incapable of future aggression. These Torah stories are an eternal lesson. Torah is lessons we need to be able to apply to our current day reality. Contemporary Israel has mirrored Achav's naivete, failing to apply this crucial lesson of decisive victory, trading it in for false pretenses of justice and a paper peace. This ancient story sets the stage for our look at today. Fast forward more recently, right? We look at the Yom Kippur War. During the Yom Kippur War, the Lubavitcher Rebbe advocated for Israel's defense military action, decisive action, urging the IDF capture the Syrian capital, Damascus, go all the way to Damascus, having argued that doing so would humble the Syrian government and send a powerful message to never attack Israel. It would also serve the immediate goal of securing the northern front, allowing Israel to focus on its efforts to defeat Egypt. The Rebbe suggested a similar approach to Cairo, with the aim of undermining Egypt's military capabilities and establishing a solid deterrent. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, Chief of Staff General David Elazar, they echoed the recommendations, conquer Damascus. Golda Meir vetoed the idea. In response to her decision, at that time, the Rebbe publicly drew a parallel to the 40 years of Jewish people spent wandering in the desert, a situation that could have been avoided had it not been for their slave mentality. The Rebbe described modern Israel's surrender to Western pressure, leading to unnecessary tragic outcomes. Yom Kippur War ended in a ceasefire. While Israel emerged tactically victorious, the Arab narrative framed the conflict as a defeat for Israel, which then promoted a perception of Israeli vulnerability against its adversaries. That is not until it is subdued. Had we until it is subdued, that would have significantly altered the region's geopolitical landscape in Israel's favor. But we didn't.
Well, there was some thought that if we crushed that Egyptian Third Army when we went into Egypt there, that we would cause maybe possibly Russia to
So we're going to talk about this shortly, but if you think about it, every time that we are bold and solid, and everyone yells against us, but we're bold and solid, they've made threats. And then when we've conquered, they say, oh, you shouldn't have done that, but let's go on with life. Right? So the political threats are in the moment. That doesn't follow afterwards, though. It's positioning. It's just political positioning. Stop listening to politicians. And in these cases where life is at risk, listen to the military experts.
You and I were little shavers back then.
But even the military experts at the time were very strong, right? And the politician did not listen. That's why the Rebbe was very, very strong about when it comes to halacha, Jewish law, about a risk of life, you ask the experts, don't ask the politicians. Don't ask the people standing by, ask the experts. When it comes to medical, you ask medical experts. When it comes to war, you ask military experts. After the Yom Kippur War, Israel's military focus shifted. Again, the primary threats were no longer state actors like Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, but now it was terrorist organizations, PLO, Hamas, Hezbollah. Beyond their hostility towards Israel and frequent terror attacks, the PLO engaged in causing trouble wherever they are, including hijacking and detonation of Western civilian planes while on Jordanian soil, as well as a bid to overthrow the government, culminating in the assassination attempt on King Hussein of Jordan, which of course then caused King Hussein of Jordan to mobilize the Jordanian army to expel the PLO because of political pressure from other Arab countries. Hussein allowed the PLO to relocate to Lebanon through Syria. By 71, he had expelled the PLO along with many Palestinian civilians from Jordan.
Yeah.
After relocating to Lebanon, the PLO continued their hostilities. They used Lebanon as the base for launching an attack against Israel, and they played a key role in sparking the Lebanese Civil War in 75, which eventually led to their being expelled by the Lebanese and Syrian forces in 91. Back in 1982, following years of terrorist attacks by the Lebanese-based PLO, the Israeli military invaded Lebanon with the objective of fully neutralizing the PLO. Prime Minister Menachem Begin described the operation's objective as to achieve a 40-year peace. It's called Operation Peace in the Galilee. This military campaign sought to bring peace to northern Israel by ending the ongoing attacks from Lebanon. Over time, however, it became a first conflict in a series of military operations, eventually this one becoming known as the First Lebanon War. Second Lebanon War took place in 2006, and at the time of the writing of this book a year ago, it looks like there could easily be a third one, given Hezbollah's intensive military and rocket arsenal buildup. And again, this time more costly and more expensive of not only civilians, but military as well. The first Lebanon War has been broadly described as a failure, actually making comparisons to American efforts in Vietnam and Afghanistan. In June of '82, Israel invaded Lebanon. By the end of the first day, Israeli forces had advanced approximately 17 miles into Lebanese territory. By the fourth day, they'd reached the outskirts of Beirut, the Lebanese capital. The objective, the mission objective, was to capture territory up to Beirut within 96 hours and then support the establishment of a new government. Within a few days, Israel had decimated the Syrian Air Force, repelled the PLO. Both the Syrians and the PLO, of course, they pleaded for a ceasefire. Capitulating to international pressure, Israel agreed to a ceasefire on the sixth day of the war before its soldiers could actually enter Beirut and eliminate the PLO. Again, the ceasefire gave the PLO time to strengthen their position. At that time, the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke up and he said, some individuals advocate repeating the mistakes made in previous wars, arguing that we should halt the current military operation and refrain from completing the original mission plans, which aim to ensure the Jews can live safely throughout Eretz Yisrael. They base their reasoning on fear of international pressure. However, we must follow the advice of our military experts, because they're the only ones that know the relevant expertise in this matter of saving lives. They have unanimously agreed the imperative to see the operation through to its conclusion. This is the only pragmatic approach to assuring the safety and peace of Eretz Yisrael and Amcha Yisrael. With its hands tied by politicians, instead of advancing forcefully, the IDF plodded cautiously forward during ceasefire windows and fought reactively, not proactively, which again is in violation of Torah Halacha. This led the IDF to suffer heavy losses, which our government should not allow. Israeli soldiers became easy targets for the Syrian army. Meanwhile, 12,000 PLO terrorists, including their leadership, fortified themselves in Beirut. As the war carried on, Syria continued to violate the terms of the ceasefire, compelling the IDF to advance further. Again, it's a repeating process. By this stage, the IDF had surrounded western Beirut, cutting off its water and electricity supply. Siege. IDF plane dropped leaflets all over Beirut advising residents evacuate the area. But the war plodded on slowly. The Rebbe advocated strongly avoid urban combat, urging the IDF to instead exert pressure externally by surrounding Beirut and threatening its destruction. This aimed to minimize casualties on both sides and compelled the PLO to surrender without further bloodshed. The goal would be to deliver a heavy blow to Beirut while simultaneously protecting Israeli soldiers from the thicket of urban warfare. The Rebbe compared this, our medical staff, listen up. The Rebbe compared this to a surgery procedure that consistently gets stopped by ignorant people screaming fear and pain.
Hurts.
It hurts, leading to a cycle of incomplete medical operations and ongoing threat to the person's survival. Here, leading to an incomplete military operations and ongoing conflict. 56 in the Sinai, 67 the Six-Day War, 73 the Yom Kippur War. I remember when I was a teenager looking at billboard advertisements of someone who was my age, an Israeli, 20 years old, who'd already lived through 3 wars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The first Lebanon War, the second Lebanon conflict, 85 to 2000. The first and second Intifada in 87 to 2005. The second Lebanon War, 2006. Operation Cast Lead, 2008 in Gaza. Operation Pillar of Defense, 2012. Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Guardian of the Wall, 2021. The current war with Hamas. There was a U.S. general that had blamed the failure of Vietnam on political interference in military decisions.
Yeah.
He maintained that had the U.S. military leadership been allowed to execute their strategies without political constraints, the outcome would have been very different.
Completely
Same-
correct.
Same situation going on in Israel today.
Yeah.
Although Israel has devastated Gaza, if it allows Gaza to be rebuilt under an autonomous Palestinian government, we can be certain, barring miracles, the cycle of violence will perpetuate.
What?
But you
Let's
gotta,
not talk about- Yep.
but you have to realize that the politicians, keep stopping it. But who's forcing the politicians' hand are the military contractors and those providing the arms. They don't want the war to end. Where they're going to sell their weapons to.
Politicians have to answer to the populace. If the
Yeah.
populace would understand that this is costing lives, the politicians will have to back off and allow the military to do their job.
But they
But
don't.
if civilians don't speak up because they don't realize the implications, or they're too soft,
Yeah.
right? So again, let's look at other examples, not Israel. Let's look at other examples, right? Because this idea of an unwavering determination to confront and neutralize adversaries, it's not just a Jewish situation in Israel, right? Let's talk about Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
We're old enough to remember Sri Lanka. It endured 25 years of civil war ending in 2009, fueled by ethnic tensions between the Sinhali majority and the Tamili minority. From 83 to 2002, the Tamil Tigers engaged in terrorism, and they controlled a significant territory in Sri Lanka's north and eastern regions. Tigers were notorious for the use of suicide bombers. They introduced child soldiers as well as women suicide attacks. The Tigers were far more formidable than Hamas had ever been. They enjoyed vast support from international aid. In 2006, the Sri Lankan government lost a massive military offensive against the Tigers, successfully capturing their territory. This time, despite appeals from the international community and appeals from the Tigers for a ceasefire, the Sri Lankan government did not budge.
Right.
The conflict concluded with the Sri Lankan military defeating the Tigers decisively in 2009. And since then, the once fierce Tigers have ceased to exist and can no longer terrorize the Sri Lankan population. Against international community. Let's talk about El Salvador. El Salvador was experiencing tremendous gang violence. A war against this by President Nayib Bukele, using aggressive tactics to combat violent gangs. El Salvador grappled with the world's highest homicide rates because of the gangs. But in 2019, Bukele launched a forceful and comprehensive initiative to address gang violence. His approach, which was known as the Territorial Control Plan, established enhanced laws of enforcement, which again, everyone's going to cry foul, and military intervention in gang-dominated areas, culminating in the establishment of Terrorism Confined Center, arresting over 71,000 suspected gang members. The world cried foul, but this unyielding approach resulted in a significant drop in homicide rates and the weakening of the gang's influence.
Yep.
Both Sri Lanka and El Salvador face condemnation from international community, including the UN and lots of media, for their aggressive strategies. But by prioritizing national security over external pressures, both Sri Lanka and El Salvador have successfully achieved peace and improved public safety. These examples suggest that if Israel were to adopt similar tactics against terrorist threats, it would lead to a more tranquil and stable environment, allowing everyone to return to peaceful, productive lives.
Yeah.
Now, People are going to argue.
Those two countries didn't have the rest of the world sticking their nose in their business.
No, they did. Sri Lanka, El Salvador, they absolutely had in fact, America was putting a lot of pressure against El Salvador.
Yeah.
Right? But they said in Yiddish, kushin tochas.
Yeah.
Okay. They basically refused to come. Now, of course, there are going to be arguments, right? The humanitarian cost of implementing such a strategy is too high, right? But terrorist groups thrive on exploiting humanitarian concerns.
Yep.
They thrive on international law. They weaponize it to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
The first step in effectively combating these terrorist groups, and understand, these are terrorist groups,
Yep.
is to understand the way they exploit the national concerns, internationals, right? One must then take decisive action to quell the terrorists, undermine their population support, bring about peace. Prioritizing humanitarian concerns can be a red herring. If restraint will perpetuate the cycle of violence, leading to more humanitarian crises for everyone involved. Decisively neutralizing violent groups leads to the more humane outcome and actually brings peace. It's counterintuitive in the moment, but it's very short-sighted. Short-sighted humanitarian concerns are part of the challenge. So consider Gaza, right? Every time Israel has granted Gaza greater autonomy, the Palestinian government of Gaza has perpetuated more serious attacks. These attacks have led to more Palestinian casualties since Israel has to respond to defend itself. This leaves Israel two humanitarian options. Maintain control over Gaza to prevent it from being a launch pad for serious attacks by protecting Israel's citizens and, by extension, Gazan, or allow indiscriminate attacks from Gaza, putting Israel's in harm's way and ultimately risking the dismantling of the country altogether.
They were definitely in better shape in 2005 before we pulled out.
Israel has sufficient military power to defeat Hamas.
Yeah.
If Israel were to fight in an uncompromising war against the Gazan Strip, Hamas and local parties would be forced to surrender, breaking the cycle of conflict and actually paving way for positive growth. The international community has stood by as numerous humanitarian crises have unfolded. If you stop and think about that, again, the book actually goes into a list of concurrent humanitarian crises that are much worse than Gaza that the world doesn't comment on. Once Sri Lanka and El Salvador addressed domestic terrorist issues, they faced complaints from the international community. However, these concerns have had very little impact, and now both countries enjoy greater prosperity. Israel must conduct a cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
If Israel preemptively ceases fire or withdraws from Gaza or Lebanon, such that active terrorists can fortify and others can form, other terrorist groups can form, Israel will be forced to deal yet again with an emboldened and empowered enemy. Either go another round and risk more lives of our own and civilian, or ignore international comments and proactively dismantle terrorist infrastructures. It's of a concern that if we don't do this now, we may not have the power and the military capabilities to finish the job. And we might face stronger international pressure and opposition.
Yeah.
And if Hamas maintains its hold on Gaza and there's a political landscape shift in the world, it could be more hostile to Israel than it already is.
Yeah.
The pacifist approach imagines that terrorism can be defeated without resorting to war. This is a dangerous misconception and ultimately leads to more war.
Yep.
Not only can our half-hearted efforts, are they unhelpful, they're damaging. as they enable the enemy to hold out, build up, and it causes additional deaths. The enemy and its supporting populace will only stop their aggression if they believe further warfare is no longer in their best interests. So, conclusion. Military strength and strategy, while important, are not the ultimate key to successful outcome. A victory is granted by God, not by our own abilities. But on the other hand, God created a natural world, and he wants us to operate within its principles. And as such, we must strike a balance between faith and practical action. After careful consideration, and again, looking to the Torah for guidance, we can see that the only way to end the cycle of violence in Israel is to take decisive military action, ensuring the enemy will not be able to regroup for another fight, ideally accomplished through military deterrence, stopping the battle before it starts. This deterrence should stem with a formidable military force and the perception that Israel will, if necessary, unconditionally respond if provoked. If that image of deterrence is compromised, Israel has to attack, retaliate until the enemy has completely neutralized. Again, the other strategy may appear more benevolent.
No, it doesn't.
Ultimately, it perpetuates the cycle of violence.
Yep.
In the end, the principles by which we can actually see peace in the Middle East comes down to establishing military deterrent, demonstrating any aggression will be countered with a decisive response, and maintain security through that deterrence. It's the only way forward.